The paradox of tolerance states that if a society is tolerant without limit, its ability to be tolerant is eventually ceased or destroyed by the intolerant. This is generally attributed to Karl Popper. And even in this late hour, with conservative movements everywhere normalizing violence and tyranny as a valid form of political expression and rule, we have people arguing their expression must be tolerated. Yet I have recently read what I think is the most concise refutation of why no society can, at least if it claims to be a civilization. The post is from Anarcho Nina Writes, which I'll be quoting parts from. Feel free to read it in its entirety as it is up on screen right now. Fascism is not politics. Fascism is a statement of murderous intent that you've been taught to think of as a political formation. If I went around saying, I will kill you, or someone should kill you, to every person I didn't like, they'd lock my ass up eventually. But if you run around saying, we need to decide if people like you should exist, is that politics? My puckered ass it is. So spreading fascist ideology and advocating for fascist political solutions and organizations are absolutely not a question of speech rights, personal opinions, or political advocacy at all. Any more than I have a right to found the murder party around my purely hypothetical desire to murk billionaires through the use of increasingly elaborate mechanical traps for sport and entertainment in a new society built around a non-secular religion where the deity looks suspiciously like me. Once you understand that fascism isn't politics, it's a statement of intent to commit violence, the question of someone's right to be a fascist falls entirely away. The motivation for this piece started last week in response to a comment made on Mastodon that the Jewish community has been beset by a wave of bomb threats against their places of worship, especially against those being live-streamed. This is in advance of the normal wave of threats during their high holy days. Another member notes that similar threats beset LGBTQ communities right now. And synagogues are also being harassed by trolls. And now a fumbled attempt at a campus massacre.
On campus, they observed the mass shooter putting on his bulletproof vest. And in this video, you won't be able to distinguish it in the audio, but in the video, you can see the campus security coming to chase off the shooter, 21-year-old Ryan Palmetto. Take a listen in.
Oh, no, he might do some shit, though. Oh, yeah, he locking that door. He got that bulletproof vest. And BSO is on the way. Yeah, it's suspicious.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Grab him.
Grab him. Oh, they finna get his ass.
It isn't lost on somebody of my age how wide the doors have been pushed open to indulge defamation, contempt, denial of science, and indulgence of outright lies as only an aspect of political opinion, protected by free speech, as the nation's billionaires have poured hundreds of millions of dollars every year for a half-century to normalize the kinds of speeches made in 1930s Germany. The gap is painfully clear compared to the sentiments aired by the U.S. military in 1947, barely 2 years after the Allied victory over Germany and Japan, or by journalists and media personalities who had fought or sacrificed in that effort.
These books are free, paid for by real Americans who want others to know the truth.
Excuse me, young man, but are you actually going to read that stuff?
Sure, why not? You heard what he said, didn't you?
Yes, I heard. But do you believe in that kind of talk?
I don't know, makes pretty good sense to me.
It would have been shown in movie theaters along with a newsreel and cartoons before the main attraction, and this 20-minute public service announcement went viral in the wake of the Unite the Right rally in 2017. Some of you may recognize it for this reason. Pause for a moment to consider that the military brass thought it necessary to drive home this value scant years after the defeat of the Axis powers. The reality is fascism had had its fans before the war, both for Mussolini and for the Nazis. The German-American Bund was a very active fascist organization before the U.S. entered the war. At their height, they held a rally of 20,000 people in Madison Square Garden, which featured speakers that repeatedly denounced FDR, the New Deal as a Jewish scheme, Jewish American groups, communism, and trade unions. Their attitude haven't really changed since then, haven't they? But this was all in contrast to the very early stages of the Cold War, where the prosperity and tolerance in the U.S. was integral to the ideological contest being waged with the USSR. And I have to imagine that a lot of this was keenly felt. After everything the nation had been through, after all the blood and treasure sacrificed defeating the Axis powers, where black and women faces manufactured the weapons of war, where second-class citizen men fought with distinction and valor, where a deviant broke the Enigma Code, granting the Allies military advantage, and academics forced to flee Europe granted the U.S. technical superiority for decades to come. I don't think the brass was too keen to see racial and religious violence emerge in the U.S.
I'm speaking to you as an American. And I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without. Without what? Yeah, without what? Without Negroes. Without alien foreigners. Without Catholics. Without Freemasons. You know these people.
What's wrong with the Masons? I'm a Mason. Hey, that fellow's talking about me.
And that makes a difference, doesn't it?
These are your enemies. These are the people who are trying to take over our country. Now you know them. You know what they stand for. And it's up to you and me to fight them. Fight them and destroy them before they destroy us.
And so there are really two parts of the story. The first is the story itself, which is the demographic trend, where whites are trending towards extinction in the United States. Like that's the way it's headed.
What? And what, may I ask, is an Aryan? I don't know myself. But let us see what our present so-called authorities have to say about it. They say he is tall, slender, blue-eyed, and blonde.
Before he said Masons, you were ready to agree with him.
Well, yes, but he was talking about, what about those other people?
But in this country, we have no other people. We are American people, all of us.
What about you? You aren't American, are you?
I was born in Hungary, but now I am an American citizen. And I have seen what this kind of talk can do. I saw it in Berlin.
What were you doing there?
I was a professor at the university. I heard the same words we have heard today. But I was a fool then. I thought Nazis were crazy people, stupid fanatics. But unfortunately, it was not so. This is not classroom theory. I saw it happen. I saw it first in Berlin in 1932. These men were all fellow Germans when they came here today. Now they were split into rival groups, suspicious of each other, hating each other. They were being swindled, all of them. But the man who was really being fooled was Hans. He was pure German, according to Nazi standards. To him they promised everything, and he fell for it. That's how Hans became a Superman. They gave him a uniform and they pumped up his ego. He wasn't just a little fellow out of work anymore. He was a member of the master race. His wife couldn't quite understand. Even though he was a Superman, there wasn't any food in the house. Stupid woman. But in the crucial test of war, Hitler's race theories didn't pay off. His pure-blooded Supermen were defeated by the mongrel armies he despised. By the British at El Alamein. By the Russians at Stalingrad. And then on D-Day by American soldiers of every color and religion who smashed across the Normandy beaches and drove on through to the heart of Germany. For the misguided Germans who had swallowed the Nazi bait, the Nazi game did not pay off. The continent of Europe was strewn with millions of German bodies, pure Aryan bodies. Karl, the farmer, was left in the snow outside of Moscow. Heinrich stayed in Italy at Salerno. And Hans, who was going to rule the world, got only a little patch of Normandy that he could call his own.
This was a racist-inspired young white man who was radicalized by online media. If the parents in this situation are really lost, and it sounds like they don't know how their son got into this kind of situation, it sounds like they had no idea. Okay, I can tell you exactly where to look. Look at that manifesto. This is what Sheriff T.K. Waters said that I have to disagree with.
I want to be very clear that there is absolutely no evidence that the shooter is part of any large group.
Oh, no. There is absolutely evidence that this man is connected to a much larger group, and the evidence is the very manifesto that T.K. Waters cites. The fact that there is a radicalization happening of young white men who are aggrieved, who feel like they are the most oppressed people on the face of the planet. And how could they think this when they live in the lap of luxury in this nice, comfortable neighborhood in Clay County? That's because right-wing media is telling them that they are victims, that they are aggrieved.
We must never let that happen to us or to our country. We must never let ourselves be divided by race or color or religion, because in this country we all belong to minority groups. I was born in Hungary. You are a Mason. These are minorities. And then you belong to other minority groups too. You are a farmer. You have blue eyes. You go to the Methodist Church. Your right to belong to these minorities is a precious thing. You have a right to be what you are and say what you think, because here we have personal freedom. We have liberty. And these are not just fancy words. This is a practical and priceless way of living. But we must work at it. We must guard everyone's liberty, or we can lose our own. If we allow any minority to lose its freedom by persecution or by prejudice, we are threatening our own freedom. And this is not simply an ideal. This is good, hard common sense.
1947 America was hardly the bastion of equality, but the men and women who contributed to the Allied victory remembered their role in it for the rest of their lives. And the value of tolerance was internalized by news figures such as Brinkley or Cronkite, and in TV shows like Twilight Zone or Outer Limits. I will note here that Rod Serling had served in the military, as had many public figures. Yet it was the turbulence of civil and women's rights, vehement protest against Vietnam, the rise of unions, and the curbs placed on corporations that incited right-wing wealth to take up the campaign yet again. They could now argue that social unrest was the product of socialist influence, and their political ally, Ronald Reagan, and the moral majority successfully set the U.S. onto the path of fascism once more. Its success has been the product of a slow, methodical indoctrination to breed contempt of others, of academics, science, literature, popular culture, religion, or law that did not serve them. These are all the same targets and methods of fascism. If you have not seen Don't Be a Sucker in Full, I have provided a link in the description. It is a well-crafted piece of storytelling, even if the propaganda of freedom and liberty for blacks, well, it grates just a tad.
Hell of a story. Could have been even worse. Jeffrey Harris, armed with a shotgun, was prevented entry into a mostly black Pennsylvania church, possibly stopping a racially motivated mass shooting. In response, Harris raised his loaded 12-gauge shotgun at two women standing at an intersection on the corner of Melrose Avenue and 4th Street near the location of the church.